Hare Krishna, everyone, and welcome back once again to our ever ongoing series on the glories of our beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, we're continuing with our mini-series on Stimulation for Ecstatic Love, and this will be part 142, in which we will continue our discussions on Radha and Krishna's disguises. In our recent lectures, we have discussed how Krishna assumes a variety of disguises in his pastimes, and today I would like to begin by discussing how Krishna assumed the disguise of a boatman. Now, of course, for many of you, this is a very, very well-known and often shared pastime, both in Braj and also around the world. But because of its transcendental nature, one never tires of hearing it, or any other pastime of Krishna. Srila Prabhupada makes this very clear in Krishna book. He writes famously in chapter 1, for one who is wrapped in hearing and chanting about Krishna, the subject matter never becomes hackneyed or old. That is the significance of transcendental subject matter, in contrast to material subject matter. Material subject matter becomes stale, and one cannot hear a certain subject for a long time. He wants change. But as far as transcendental subject matter is concerned, it is called Nitya Nava Nava Yamana. Nitya Nava Nava Yamana. It means, Prabhupada writes, this means that one can go on chanting and hearing about the Lord and never feel tired, but remain fresh and eager to hear more and more. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. So, by doing so, the Shravanam Kirtanam, one becomes purified, and when visiting Sri Vrindavan, one can experience the bliss of that divine abode. Bhakti Ratnakara, chapter 5, quotes Raghava Pandit, a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who said, all the places where Krishna performed his pastimes can only be seen in ecstasy by people who are fortunate. All the places where Krishna performed his pastimes can only be seen in ecstasy by people who are fortunate. And Prabhus, we are fortunate. We're in this disciplic succession in our founder acharyas, Srila Prabhupada. So this pastime of Krishna assuming the disguise of a boatman can, you can say, technically fall under the category of his Jala-keli pastimes. Jala-keli means his water pastimes. I was reading that many of Krishna's water pastimes take place during Vrindavan's hot summers, naturally so. In this regard, in this mood, Srila Sanatana Goswami writes in Hari Bhakti Vilas, chapter 15, verses 1 to 18. It's really interesting that during the hot, scorching days of April through July, many of you will know, in Vrindavan, one should stand, place, or submerge his beloved Ishtadeva, his deity. Obviously, we're speaking about a smaller deity, in a vessel of cool water, because Krishnam Jala Viha Rinam. Krishna is fond of playing in the prem waters of Braj. Krishna is fond of playing in the prem waters of Braj. What's more, he writes, Yushna Samaye Bhagavata Jala-keli Mahotsavam. This ceremony should be a super celebration. That's my translation. This ceremony should be a super celebration. Then he gives detailed instructions how to perform this bathing ceremony, which he calls Krishna's Jala-keli festival. Jala-keli festival. He writes, And of course this can be done by devotees all over the world, not necessarily in Braj. In your summertime you can also do. It's Hari Bhakti Vilas. He writes, one should stand his beloved deity under dripping water, coming from a small silver or clay pot above the deity. Regarding Shalagram Shilas and Govardhan Shilas, he writes for this ceremony, Sital ena shunga dina jalena purite. They can be fully submerged in a water pot or big bowl that doesn't have to drip down. They can be inside the pot of fragrant cool water, scented by tulsi manjaris, sandalwood paste, rose water, edible camphor, and flower petals from the rose, mogra, juhi, and chameli flowers. If you can't get all those flowers, you can use local flowers with the scent. He also writes, don't observe these water pastimes on a summer day that is cloudy and gloomy. A little note there. Then he gives us the benefits of performing this summer festival for our deities to keep them cool. He writes the benefits. He writes, Jala-keli mahotsavam. He says that by observing this kind of festival, punyam anantakam, one will attain never-ending beauty and religious merit. And kula pavana, kule na bhaved bupa naraki. One's family becomes pure and never sees hell. And yagna koti satam bhuvi. He writes, one attains the merit of millions of havans and homas. Havans and homas, fire sacrifices. You just bathe your deity in the summer. Have some Hari Bhakti Vilas. I thought that you would be interested. Summertime. So now we will discuss the well-known Jala-keli pastime of Krishna disguised as a boatman, as told to us by Srila Jiva Goswami in his Gopal Champu. So in Vrindavan, Srimati Radharani and her friends often have to cross over bodies of water, like lakes, and ponds, and streams, with their milk products to sell in various marketplaces. Actually, one might wonder, why would Sri Radha have to sell butter in the first place? Would selling a few pots of butter change her family's fortunes? Well, there can only be one answer to this question, and that is, the gopis crossing rivers, ponds, and streams to sell butter has only one purpose: to enjoy pastimes with their beloved Krishna. Like everything in Vrindavan, everything centered around Krishna is in the center, Radha and Krishna. So, one evening, Radhika and her friends arrived at Manasa Ganga Lake at Govardhan Hill. That evening, it's described they were eager to offer their different milk preparations to Haridev. Haridev is the presiding deity at Manasa Ganga. There's a beautiful temple there on the other side of the lake. But upon arriving at the shore of this sacred lake, they were disappointed to find that there were no boats waiting at the dock. Actually, there was one old and very rickety-looking boat at the far end of the landing, but there was no boatman in sight. And aside from a rumpled blanket lying on the deck of that boat, the boat appeared empty. So disappointed at this turn of events, the gopis were just about to return home when they heard a low moaning sound. Not a loud moaning, but low moaning sound coming from this old boat, as if someone were stirring from a deep slumber. So Sri Radhika ordered one of her manjaris, find out where that noise is coming from. So the maidservant dutifully walked down the landing, carefully stepped onto this old rickety boat, and cautiously approached this crumpled blanket, because that's all there was. And from beneath that blanket came what sounded like heavy breathing. So this gopi, she hesitated for a moment and looked back towards Sri Radhika, who encouraged her friend with some movement of the hand. So the young girl took courage and pulled back that old dusty blanket. And lo and behold, there, lying on the boat's deck, was a young boatman who, from the sounds of his snoring, appeared to be in deep sleep. So Sri Radha's friend turned back to Sri Radha and her friends, who were watching, with curiosity, and said described a loud whisper. Whispers are soft, but this was a loud whisper. She said, "It looks like a boatman, but he's asleep." So hearing this, Sri Radhika herself walked down the pier until she stood, it's described, directly above the boat. And clearing her voice, she called out, "Boatman! Boatman!" But he didn't seem to hear. "Boatman! Boatman!" she called again and again, but louder, and this time accompanied by a chorus of her girlfriends. They chimed in. She's saying, "Boatman," they joined in, a chorus, a real chorus, absolute chorus, nectar. So finally, this boatman stirred and slowly turned over. And it appeared to them that he was a young man. He was dressed in simple clothes, and his hair was tucked under a well-worn turban. But it appeared he must have been new to this profession because his hands and feet looked very soft. There were no calluses, when you work with your hands, rowing. His hands were all very soft. There was no calluses. So this boy, he spoke up. He said to Sri Radhika and the gopis, "It's been a long day and I'm resting. Please get yourself another boat or come back tomorrow." And with that, he lay down again, pulling the blanket away from the gopi and over his head. But then, at Sri Radha's signal, her maidservant, quickly pulled the blanket away. And Lalita Devi, standing nearby, as she does, in a very strong voice, she said, "Wake up, boatman, the princess of Varshana." Wow. The princess of Varshana wants to cross the waters to worship Haridev. Do not delay. Set your oar in place and take us to the far shore. And you will be handsomely rewarded, not to mention the fact that you will have the privilege to serve the most chaste and pious girl of Braj. The most chaste and pious girl of Braj. So the boatman, he finally sat up, and after much discussion and arguing, they all reached an agreement, or rather he reached an agreement with Lalita, that his payment for transporting the gopis would be the remnants of Haridev's yogurt, butter, and kheer food, prasadam. He'd get the remnants. We would all like that. And as the gopis began to board the boat, the boatman insisted here, at this point, that it would be safer to go in 2 trips. But Radha would hear nothing of it. For night was coming, this is, evening's approaching, and they were in a rush. So she said to him, "No, we will all go at once." So at that point, the boatman reluctantly, apparently, pushed off from the shore, pulling on his long oars, all the while singing some song about, quote, boating on the river with one's sweetheart. This is how it's written, Jiva Goswami. Boating on the river with one's sweetheart. Now, as time passed, they seemed to be making good time over the river. Sometimes it's lake or river, it's sometimes different terms are used. Actually, Manasaganga is a big lake now. And they were making good time over this lake. But about a third of the way across the lake, the boatman stopped rowing. And he tilted his turban back on his head, and he sat down just gazing out at the water. So the cowherd girls, they all looked at each other in amazement, like, what's going on? We have to get to the other shore. Howdy, Dave. So Radha then prompted one of them to inquire. So this gopi said, "Oh, boatman, why have you stopped?" To which came the reply, "Dear lady, I'm tired and hungry. You woke me after a hard day's work before I could have my dinner. You all filled this boat to twice its capacity, insisted that I race to the other side, but without eating, I cannot exert myself any further." This was his answer. So at first, all the gopis, they tried to encourage the boatman to, how could you say, rise to the occasion. Then they threatened him with punishment. But when neither tactic worked, they gave him access to their pots of milk products, and he ate. But to their shock, he devoured the contents of not just 1, 2, or 3 pots, but all the pots on board. After which he declared, "Oh, following such a feast, I must take a short nap." So at that point, the gopis spoke, it's described, heatedly amongst themselves, as the strong current of the water swept them out of the sight of Haride's temple. They could see as they're crossing, but now the current's so strong, the boat's going way, way off course, and they're getting really in anxiety. And meanwhile, their captain was stretched out on his seat, having a snooze. Like what? And as if to pacify their irritation with good news, he announced, quote, "If 2 of you maidens massaged my feet and another 2 my arms, I could resume my rowing that much sooner." If 2 of you maidens massaged my feet and another 2 my arms, I could resume my rowing much sooner. And all the gopis became very angry and restless to hear this outrageous proposal. But they're, in their irritation, the boat's moving back and forth, and eventually tilting on one side, causing them all to shriek in fright. Finally, after the boat had settled itself, because they calmed down, Lalita Saki threatened as follows: "Boatman, unless you start to row right now, we certainly will hold you by your hands and feet and toss you overboard. Now get up." The gopis were going to tie him up and throw him into the lake. So reluctantly, the boatman resumed his service, and not a moment too soon, as they say, because dark clouds were beginning to gather overhead. It's already quite a situation, but now these big dark clouds are beginning to gather overhead. You see that in some of the paintings of this pastime. And before long, a strong wind whipped up the lake, and water began to seep into the boat. So shaking his head, and with it a small peacock feather in his turban, shaking his head, and with it a small peacock feather in his turban, the boatman called out over this raging wind, "Girls, I warned you that all of you together would be too heavy a load for this old boat. Now look, my boat is taking on water. Unless you lighten our load by disposing more weight, surely we will all sink. So you must all immediately throw your precious pots overboard." The pots were empty. We had to throw the pots overboard. At that, the girls, they kind of grumbled. It's described cursing their fate as they threw their valuable gold pots overboard. I read like that. They threw their valuable gold pots overboard. But even as the girls watched their, how could you say, family heirlooms disappear into the depths one by one of this water, the boatman called out to them saying, "Oh, the boat is still taking on water. Now you must all discard your weighty jewelry. The gopis are that beautiful gold jewelry. So in a chorus, another chorus here, the girls answered, never. In your mind's eye, you see all these gopis. Never, never. But as the hems, you could say, of their skirts started to soak up the rising water, they tossed all their necklaces and bracelets and gold anklets into the lake's swelling waves with, it's described, tears of resignation. Tears of resignation. But adding to their despair, the gopis could see that the water level in the boat was still rising, despite everything they'd thrown into the lake. And at that, the boatman said, famously, the only way we can keep this boat from sinking is if you all bail the water out yourselves. Wow. To which the gopis angrily answered, we would have done that with the pots, but boatman, you made us throw them overboard. So smiling, the boatman suggested, well, use your blouses to soak up the water and then wring them out overboard. Take your blouses, soak up the water in the boat, and then wring them out overboard. And this incensed the cowherd girls, who replied, we would rather wring your neck and throw you overboard. And as the waves of this lake became more ferocious, the clouds above released a deluge from above. As the gopis, how could you say, sat helplessly in their tiny craft. And by now they were completely drenched. And Sri Radha felt, it's described, extremely guilty for risking her girlfriends' lives, not to mention she was distressed at the thought of never seeing Krishna again. So, having no other recourse, she stood up and raising her arms in the air, then threw them around the boatman, calling out, Boatman, boatman, only you can save us. Please save us, please save us. And at that instant, a flash of lightning struck her. But the lightning flash didn't come from a cloud, it came from the body of the boatman, who, pleasantly surprised, by this contact with Vrindavan Ishwari, Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi, Radhe Vrindavan Ishwari, he put a free arm around Sri Radha and, taking advantage, pulled her closer, actually into a tight embrace. And Radhika, in order to defend herself, she reached behind the boatman, behind his back, to free herself, when suddenly, this is the moment to pause, when suddenly she felt a certain bamboo flute in the attire of the boatman. And as she held the flute up, suddenly the thunder and the lightning stopped, the winds died down, the clouds disappeared, and all the ferocious waters receded. It's calm, Manasakankale. And with that, all the gopis' faces lit up with smiles. They all cried, again in a chorus, it's him, it's him, it's Krishna. And Krishna, like an actor receiving a standing ovation, bowed his head towards the gopis. And then he pulled Radha even closer. And seeing Krishna standing before them, all the gopis who had been terribly frightened by the whole ordeal, and who were still drenched from head to toe in water, stood fully satisfied, gazing upon the divine couple. For once again, they were united together. This is the gopis and the sakis. They're always trying, to bring Radha and Krishna together, because there's, for various reasons, they're separated, social customs. So whenever they can bring them together, they're happy. They united the divine couple upon the stage of Braj Leela. That's how it's described, upon the stage of Braj Leela. Wow. So it's not over. Then beneath the full moon, because by now the evening had turned into night, and this pastime's taking a long time, Krishna steered the boat towards the nearest island, where he and the gopis, they changed into dry clothes, Well, joking about the highlights of their adventure, then once again they boarded the boat, which had, like Krishna, cast off its disguise to reveal a golden, jewel-studded craft, equipped with all the paraphernalia necessary to serve the divine couple. And as Radha and Krishna reclined on a comfortable couch, one gopi sang, another one played musical instruments, still others steered their boat through the calm, lotus-filled waters of Manasa Ganga at Govardhan Hill. Then the divine boat embarked, it's described, on an island-to-island cruise. Jiva Goswami writes, they went from island to island, in which Krishna and the gopis reveled in their mutual love within the transcendental beauty of Manasa Ganga's opulence. If only we could see. When will that day be ours? So I'm going to conclude today with two relevant prayers by Sri Raghunath Das Goswami from his Utkanta Dashakam. Utkanta Dashakam. Many of you may not have heard about it, but these are of this book, but they are 10 anxious prayers for worshipping Srimati Radharani, and verses 8 and 9 are relevant to today. So Raghunath Das Goswami, at this point in his writings, verses 8 and 9, he's therein hankering to participate in Radha and Krishna's Jala-keli, in their water pastimes, and specifically in his writings at Sri Radhakund. So Jala-keli. So he writes, "When will I serve Sri Radha in her favorite lake on a warm summer evening that made her yearn to enjoy water pastimes? She and her playful friends jubilantly sprinkle the expert water sportsman, Lord Govinda, with water from their Jala-yantras. Jala-yantras is like those syringes, Jala-yantras." And the second prayer, "Radha and her Sakis and the best of loving heroes, Krishna, all enter the Lila-kund, Radhakund, the Lila-kund, in great fun. How wonderfully clever are their water pastimes. The Sakis join our loving heroine, Sri Radha, and start to combat our hero, Sri Krishna. Then Radha and Krishna begin to sprinkle each other with water. Radha Mohana, Krishna, looks at the kund, while Radharani, spends her time in the prema-filled waters. Hare Krishna. Well, glories to all these acharyas who have given us access to these wonderful pastimes, and especially to Srila Prabhupada, who makes them understandable for us to relish. So I have some more. Well, there are more disguised pastimes, and we'll continue probably for a few more weeks, but I thought this one was really nice, the Boatman pastime across Manasa Ganga Lake. Hare Krishna. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki, Mayapur Dham ki, Gaur Nitai ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Yagya ki, Nitai Gaur Pimanandi, Jai Jai Sri Sri Radhe Sham, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Hare Krishna.